The paper plate still sits on the edge of the trash can, smeared with cranberry sauce and bits of cold stuffing. He handed it to me that night, without looking up. Said there wasn't space at the table. I ate alone by the washer. My name, my house, and no seat. The next morning, he told me the guest room was needed for his new office. But he forgot one thing. The deed never left my name. He kicked me out of my own house. So I sold it while he was still sleeping inside. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Comment below. This house was never just wood and walls. It was Sunday mornings with sunlight falling on the kitchen floor, and the soft creak of the back porch swing when my husband would sit there after mowing the lawn. It was where I brought my baby boy home, wrapped in a yellow blanket, barely the size of my forearm. We built this life slowly, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. 42 years of little steps, putting aside for paint, for plumbing, for the dream of a front garden with daffodils. And it all came true, piece by patient piece. When we moved in, the wallpaper was peeling and the roof leaked when it rained. But I didn't mind. I had his laughter in the hallway and a baby's soft cry down the corridor. My husband was a quiet man, strong. He never missed a day of work, not even when his knees gave him trouble. He used to tuck away $20 a week in an envelope marked home. And when we finally paid it off, he kissed my forehead and said, "Now it's truly ours." He passed just after our 38th Thanksgiving. A soft goodbye, in his sleep, hand still holding mine. The house felt bigger after that. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that hurts your chest. But I stayed, because this place held more than grief. It held the sound of my son's footsteps on the stairs when he was 6. The dent in the dining room table from when he dropped his first science trophy. The closet full of birthday cards he made with glitter and glue. When he moved back in, years later, he said it was just until things settled. Said it'd be easier, cheaper, that we could look after each other. And for a while it felt good to have company again. He brought with him a suitcase, a laptop, and stories about promotions that never came. He slept late, stayed up later, and started changing things. Small things at first, light bulbs, curtains, the channel on the TV. Then bigger ones, moving furniture, replacing my old pans with sleek ones I didn't know how to use. I told myself it was just adjustment, that I was lucky to have him near, that maybe this was God's way of giving me someone to share the quiet with. He'd say things like, "You don't need to worry about that, Mom," and take the mail before I could read it. Or, "I'll take care of the bills, it's easier this way." At first, I trusted him. He was my boy. I had changed his diapers, held his hand on his first day of school, waited in the cold when he missed curfew. I never imagined there'd be a day when I'd feel like a guest in my own kitchen. But the signs were there. I started eating alone more often. He and his girlfriend took their plates to the living room. My favorite mug vanished from the cupboard. He said the washer was too old, replaced it with a new one I couldn't figure out. My laundry piled up for days. I told myself not to make trouble. He was busy, stressed. Everyone said the economy was hard. Maybe he was just under pressure. I clipped coupons like I always had. Wrote down every cent I spent in a little ledger with a red cover. Watched the same game shows in the afternoon, the same ones I used to watch with his father. I took care of the garden, though my knees weren't what they used to be. I pruned the roses, even when he said I didn't need to. The garden had always been mine. But inside, it was becoming less and less mine. Her shoes by the door. Her toothbrush in the upstairs bathroom. The thermostat locked with a passcode I didn't know. The pantry rearranged without asking. I still remember the day I asked if I could get a new kettle. Mine had cracked from age. He said, "That's not a priority right now." Then ordered a new espresso machine for the kitchen the very next day. I was 73. Widowed. Living in a house I had paid off with my husband's sweat and my own quiet sacrifices. And somehow, I was now the one asking for permission. I used to wake up early, 6 a.m., before the sun rose. But now I waited. Waited for them to leave, or for silence, just so I could make my tea without feeling in the way. I'd sit in the corner of the sunroom with my knitting needles, listening to them laugh behind closed doors. And I'd wonder, where did I go wrong? When did I become invisible? The photo frames in the hallway still showed our little family, smiling, arms around each other. But the people in those pictures felt like strangers. And the house. The house was no longer a home. Just a shelter with fading memories. A place where I once mattered. It started with whispers. Not loud ones, not the kind you hear on purpose. But the kind that hush as soon as you walk into the room. soft tones from behind doors, followed by silence that felt colder than any winter draft. I would walk in with folded laundry or a warm plate, and they'd stop talking. Her eyes would flick to me, half surprised, half annoyed. Then she'd smile too late, and he'd just look back at his phone. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, that I was tired. But tiredness doesn't explain locked drawers in your own kitchen. One morning, I opened the pantry to find it padlocked. A silver latch drilled into the door. No explanation, no note. Just locked. When I asked about it, he shrugged and said, "We've had too much waste lately. It's just for better budgeting." Like I was the one wasting things. As if I didn't measure every scoop of rice, every tea bag used twice. That same week, the TV remote disappeared. When I asked where it had gone, she said, "Oh, we're trying to limit screen time for the sake of our mental health." But later, I saw them watching Netflix upstairs, laughter floating down like ghosts of a life I once belonged to. My things kept vanishing, too. My worn cardigan, the one with little flowers I stitched myself, gone. My favorite pot holder, the blue one from my sister before she passed. Even the old clock from the guest room. It just wasn't there anymore. No one ever admitted moving anything. They'd say, "You probably misplaced it." Or, "We did some decluttering while you were out." But I never misplaced things. Not in this house. Not in the house where I knew every corner, every squeaky floorboard, every drafty window. Then came the thermostat. It beeped one evening when I adjusted it. A red light blinked and the screen went blank. He walked in, stared at me, and said, "It's programmed now. Don't mess with it." Like I was a child. Like I hadn't paid for every winter heating bill before he even had his first job. I began retreating to my room earlier. Not out of tiredness, but to disappear. To let them have the kitchen, the living room, the life they were carving out, without me. They began hosting dinners. I'd hear clinking silverware, smell wine and roast beef. But no one ever knocked on my door. Sometimes they'd leave me a plate, on the washer always cold. Other times, nothing at all. The final straw came on a Tuesday. I walked into the laundry room and saw my clothes, pulled from the washer, dumped in a basket, still wet. They had needed the machine for her delicates, he said. My clothes were mildew-scented by morning. Even my calendar was replaced, the one I kept on the fridge. It had little stickers I used for doctor appointments and reminders. Gone. Replaced with one of those sleek whiteboard calendars. Their names filled every box. Not a single note about my checkups, my medication pickups, nothing. It felt like erasure. Soft, silent erasure. No yelling, no threats, just my presence becoming an inconvenience. Once, I mentioned needing to pick up a prescription. He said, "You're always at the doctor. Can't you just skip it for once?" I didn't respond. I just quietly added a sticky note to my purse so I wouldn't forget the name of the new pill. I'd go to the library just to have someplace to sit and think. To breathe without walking on eggshells. There was a quiet table near the window, and I'd bring a thermos of tea and a pen. Not to write anything grand, just little notes to myself. What to remember, what not to forget. They stopped asking me anything. What I wanted for dinner, what I needed from the store. Even holidays became theirs, themed decorations I didn't recognize, dishes I didn't cook. That year on Halloween, I bought a small bag of candy and sat by the door in case trick-or-treaters came. But the porch light was unscrewed. I sat in the dark for 3 hours. No one came. No one even noticed I'd tried. It was the little things. Always the little things. Not the loud insults, not the breaking of plates. But the way I became a shadow in rooms I once filled with laughter. I began to realize something. It's not always cruelty that breaks you. Sometimes it's indifference. The way someone stops seeing you, even while you're right in front of them. That's the sharpest pain of all. And yet I stayed quiet. I folded my sweaters neatly. I lined my shoes in a row by the bed. I kept the house tidy, as if it still belonged to me. But deep down I knew. Something had shifted. I was no longer mom. No longer the homeowner. Just a guest. A burden. And one day soon, I would stop waiting for them to notice. I would start noticing myself again. It was Thanksgiving morning when I woke before the sun. The sky was still gray with sleep, and the house silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I moved slowly, my joints stiff from the chill. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and made my way to the kitchen, as I had for decades. That morning had always been mine. Every year, I baked the cornbread, basted the turkey, peeled the potatoes with the radio humming in the background. It was the one day my family always came home hungry, and I fed them until they leaned back in their chairs with full bellies and full hearts. But that year, when I entered the kitchen, everything was already done. Boxes from the grocery store sat open on the counter. Prepackaged stuffing, frozen pies, a cooked turkey in foil. No smell of onions sizzling in butter. No music. Just silence. She stood there in her satin robe, stirring something from a can. When she saw me, she said, "Oh, didn't think you'd be up this early." Then turned back to the stove. I stood there for a moment, unsure where to go, what to do with my hands. My apron was still folded on the hook, the rolling pin untouched. I whispered, "Did you need help?" But she didn't answer. She just poured gravy from a jar and kept stirring. That afternoon, the table was set with matching plates and cloth napkins I didn't recognize. The chairs were arranged neatly, 5 of them, one fewer than usual. I asked if I could sit near the window, my usual spot. He said, "There's no room this year, Mom. We're tight on space." He pointed to the laundry room, where a folding tray table and a paper plate sat next to the dryer. No candle, no silverware, just a plastic fork and a paper napkin. I carried my plate quietly and sat down. From where I sat, I could hear the clinking of glasses, their laughter, the scrape of chairs on the hardwood floor. I chewed slowly, tasting nothing, only the weight of being forgotten. After dinner, I washed my plate and placed it gently on the drying rack. No one noticed. No one said thank you. Later that evening, I overheard them talking in the living room. She said, "It's time we got that room back. It's been long enough." And he replied, "She'll understand. It's not like she uses it for anything." That night, he knocked on my door. Didn't wait for me to answer, just opened it. "We need the guest room," he said. "I'm setting up a new office for work-from-home stuff. You'll be more comfortable downstairs." I looked at him, at the boy I raised, the boy who once cried when I sewed his teddy bear's arm back on. I wanted to ask him how he could say that to the woman who held his hand through chickenpox and heartbreak and college rejections. But the words wouldn't come. I nodded, just nodded. The next morning, my belongings were boxed up by the hallway. He didn't even wait for me to move them myself. I carried the boxes down the stairs, one at a time. The basement smelled like old cement and forgotten things. There was no bed, just a folded cot and an extension cord. I sat on the cot and held my coat tight around me. There were no windows down there. No sound of birds or the wind in the trees. Only the distant footsteps above, muffled like memories. I opened one of the boxes and pulled out an old photo. The 3 of us years ago. My husband standing tall, his hand on our son's shoulder. I was holding a pie, laughing. That woman. She had no idea how it would all turn out. I sat there for hours, holding that photo, thinking of the life I had poured into that house. Not for thanks, not for praise, but for love. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Not in anger. Not even in sorrow. Just in understanding. He didn't see me anymore. Not really. I had become background noise in a life he no longer wanted to share. I thought of all the times I had bit my tongue to keep the peace. All the times I smiled through loneliness. All the meals I cooked that no one thanked me for. All the days I shrank just so he could feel bigger. And for what? So I could sleep beside a water heater? So I could eat dinner beside a washing machine? That night, I didn't cry. I didn't curse him. I just stared at the photo until my eyes grew heavy. But before I turned out the light, I did one small thing. I opened the box marked important papers. I pulled out the manila folder, the one with the deed to the house. My name. Still there. Clear as morning. And I remember whispering to no one. "You may not see me, but I see myself now." That was the moment I began to wake up. Not loudly. Not suddenly. Just slowly, like the sky before dawn. That morning, I woke before the footsteps. The house above me was still sleeping. No television, no laughter, not even the faint click of the coffee pot. I sat upright on the cot in the basement and listened to the silence. And for the first time in months, it didn't frighten me. It steadied me. I folded my blanket neatly, placed my slippers beside my feet, and opened the manila folder again. There it was. The deed. Signed in 1981, after we made the final payment. His father's name first. Then mine. And then, after he died, just mine alone. I ran my fingers over the page. Thick paper. My handwriting in blue ink. Notarized. Filed. Still valid. I looked around the basement, at the walls lined with old paint cans, the hum of the water heater, the the pile of boxes stacked like gravestones of my usefulness. And something inside me settled. Not in anger, but in decision. I didn't belong here. Not in this basement. Not in this silence. But I didn't need them to tell me that anymore. I already knew. That day, I started small. I dressed in my Sunday clothes, not the ones I wore to church, but the ones I used to wear to town when I still believed I had places to be. Navy slacks, a button sweater, soft shoes that didn't hurt my toes. I combed my hair. Put on the earrings my husband gave me on our 20th anniversary. Simple gold hoops. Not much, but they made me feel like someone who mattered. When I came upstairs, the kitchen was empty. Their bedroom door was closed. I made myself a piece of toast, wrapped it in a napkin, and stepped outside. It had rained the night before. The earth was soft under my feet, and the sky hung low and gray. I walked down the block to the bus stop. The same one I used to take to the grocery store, back when I did all the shopping myself. I rode the bus into town, the same route I knew by heart. Past the school, the old pharmacy, the gas station where they still cleaned your windshield if you asked nicely. I got off near the courthouse and walked 2 blocks to a small brick building with peeling white shutters. The sign out front read, Darcy and Knox Realty. I hadn't seen her in nearly a decade, but when Darcy opened the door, her eyes lit up like we were still 35 and chasing our toddlers through the same church hall. Clara, she said, hugging me close. We had coffee in her office, beside a dusty window with a cactus on the sill. I told her everything, not in one breath, but slowly, carefully, like unwrapping an old quilt. I told her about the dinners I wasn't invited to, the pantry that no longer opened for me, the room that had become an office, the basement. I told her about the paper plate, and the deed. When I finished, she didn't gasp or say, "How could they?" She just nodded quietly. Then she said, "You know you can still sell it, Clara. It's still yours." And that was when it began, the shift. Not a storm. Not a scream. Just a small crack of light through a closed curtain. I asked her what I needed. She gave me a list, simple steps, no pressure. Get a valuation. Make a copy of the deed. Look for a small place of my own. She said, "Whenever you're ready." And I believed her. On the way home, I stopped by the park and sat on a bench for a long while. Children ran past me with muddy shoes. A mother adjusted a scarf on her daughter. An old man fed the birds with crusts of bread. I didn't cry. I just watched. Let the quiet settle around me, this time like a blanket, not a cage. That night, I didn't go straight to the basement. I made tea and drank it slowly by the window. The porch light was off, as usual, but I turned it on, just to see the world lit up for a moment. He walked past me once, said nothing. She looked up from her phone and frowned. But I didn't flinch. I didn't offer an explanation. I just sipped my tea and stared out at the night sky. It was the first time in months I remembered how stars looked. I didn't tell them what I was planning. I didn't need to. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even rebellion. It was remembering. Remembering who I was before I became an afterthought. Before I gave up my voice to keep a house from cracking. Before I believed silence was the same as peace. Each day after that, I took small steps. A phone call here. A document copied there. A quiet visit to a senior living apartment. 1 bedroom, near the library, with a little balcony that got the morning sun. I said nothing to them. Not yet. Because this wasn't their story anymore. It was mine. And I was writing a new chapter, not in ink, but in action. In dignity. No announcements. No fury. Just the sound of a woman coming back to life, one breath at a time. Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? Let me know in the comments. The next morning, I opened the linen closet and took down the small brown suitcase. The same one I'd packed for every family road trip, to the lake, to visit his grandparents, even once to the Grand Canyon. It was old but sturdy, like me. Still carried the scent of lavender soap and memories. I placed it on the bed and opened it slowly. Not to leave yet, but to begin. I folded my softest cardigan, the one with the tiny rose-shaped buttons. My red leather wallet, the one with his father's initials still etched faintly on the back flap. A tin box of my wedding rings and my husband's watch. I added a book of poems I used to read aloud in springtime and the letter I found weeks earlier, the one my husband had written before he passed. His handwriting was steady even then. He had written, "Don't let them erase you." I kept that letter with me now. Always. Each morning after that, I walked to town. Not every day, so they wouldn't notice. Just enough to keep moving. Darcy met me on her lunch breaks, her voice calm, her hands never rushed. She told me what to do, one step at a time. Make a list of what I wanted. List the house quietly with no for sale sign. Let her handle the calls. She said, "You don't need to explain anything to anyone, Clara. You have the right." That word, right. It had been a long time since I felt like I had any. I went through drawers and boxes late at night, carefully, like a thief in my own home. Only I wasn't stealing. I was reclaiming. I found my husband's discharge papers from the war. Our first tax receipt. The letter from the bank congratulating us when we paid off the mortgage. Each paper told a story. Each one whispered, "You belong here." I packed only what mattered. One photo album, not all. The last quilt I'd sewn with my own hands. My grandmother's locket. Everything else, I let go of in my heart before I left it behind. One afternoon, while they were out, I opened my bedroom closet. Or what used to be mine. Most of the space had been filled with her clothes now. Designer blouses, high-heeled shoes I couldn't wear even when I was young. Tucked behind the coats, I found a small wooden box. Inside, my son had kept childhood trinkets, a plastic sheriff's badge, a tiny rubber frog, a crumpled ticket from his first baseball game. I held it all in my hands and smiled, then closed the lid softly. I didn't take the box. Some things belonged in the past. But I left something in its place, a folded note pressed flat between two old photos. I wrote, "You may forget who I was, but I will never forget what I gave." I placed the note in the box and stepped away. No anger in my bones. Only clarity. Back downstairs, I checked the envelope of papers. Deed copied. ID ready. Bank statement updated. I was surprised how much I remembered about doing things myself. I hadn't written a check in months, but my hands knew the rhythm. My mind hadn't forgotten how to navigate forms, even if my son thought I was too old to understand. Age doesn't erase wisdom. It just hides it under softer steps and slower mornings. I stopped asking for things after that. No more requests for the thermostat or rides to the pharmacy. If I needed something, I handled it myself. I learned to order groceries online, had them delivered to the front steps when they weren't home. I kept a new planner, hidden under the cushion of my chair, with little excess marking every move I made toward freedom. And I said nothing. No warnings. No clues. Some nights, I still sat in the dark basement, wondering if I was doing the right thing. Doubt has a way of creeping in through cracks you thought were sealed. But I'd take out the letter again, my husband's words in his familiar loop, and I'd remember. This wasn't revenge. It was release. One evening, Darcy called and said, "There's an offer on the house." I stood in the hallway, listening to her voice through the phone. She said the couple was older, like me, looking for a home to grow old in, not flip or rent or redesign beyond recognition. I walked to the back window and looked at the garden. Even now, in late fall, a few stubborn marigolds clung to the earth. The wind moved the chimes just enough to remind me. Life doesn't end when people stop seeing you. It ends when you stop seeing yourself. I accepted the offer. Signed quietly. No notary in the house, no lawyers knocking on the door. Darcy handled everything. I chose a moving date when they'd be out of town visiting her parents. Gave myself 2 more weeks. Not to rush, but to say goodbye. To each creaky floorboard. To the sunlight that used to warm my husband's chair. To the oven that baked our first Thanksgiving turkey. And to the woman I used to be, who waited for someone to give her permission. Now, I gave that permission to myself. To leave. To begin again. To reclaim what was always mine. In the days leading up to my quiet departure, I found myself remembering things I hadn't thought about in years. Not because I wanted to, but because my soul, I think, was stitching its old wounds together before it stepped into something new. It was the memory of a summer afternoon, hot, bright, and loud with the sound of cicadas. He was 9 then, just a boy with scraped knees and a wild imagination. I had been hanging laundry in the backyard, the sun warming my back, my hands full of damp sheets and clothespins. And I heard it, the shatter of glass. A neighbor's voice yelling. Then silence. I turned around and saw him standing there, his face pale, his hands stiff at his sides. He had thrown a rock. Or maybe kicked a ball too hard. Either way, the neighbor's kitchen window had cracked wide open, glass glinting in the sunlight like sharp little stars. Before he could speak, I stepped in front of him. Walked across the yard and apologized. Said it was me, that I was shaking out the blanket, and it slipped. That I'd pay to fix it. That I was sorry. The neighbor sighed, nodded, and went back inside. And my son, he just stared at me. Not with gratitude, but confusion. Later that night, I told him it was our secret. That sometimes it's better to take the fall than to shame someone you love. I thought I was protecting him, teaching him kindness. But what I taught him, without meaning to, was that I would always absorb the blame. That my love would always clean up the mess. And that mistake, I never unlearned it. Not until now. There were other moments, too, quiet hurts buried under decades of busy days and holidays and homework and bills. The year his father lost his job, and we had to sell the truck. He was 14 and furious. Slammed doors, skipped meals, rolled his eyes when I reminded him to be kind. I remember one night, I sat beside his bed, trying to explain what was happening. Why his father seemed quiet, why the house felt so tense. He pulled the blanket over his head and said, "Why don't you just fix it? You fix everything else." Even then, I carried the guilt. Tried to be enough for both of them. Cooked from scratch every night. Sewed holes in socks instead of buying new ones. Smiled even when I wanted to scream. And still, I wasn't enough. Not then. Not now. I remember his teenage years like a blur of slamming doors and silence. He stopped hugging me. Stopped sitting at the table. Stopped looking me in the eye. But I told myself it was normal. That teenage boys go quiet, that he'd come back around. He did, eventually. But by then, I had already folded myself smaller and smaller, until I barely took up space. That kind of shrinking. You don't notice it all at once. It's like dust gathering on a bookshelf, slow, silent, until suddenly everything looks faded. There was a Christmas, years ago, when he didn't come home. No phone call. No letter. I sat by the window with a pie cooling on the sill and pretended to read a book while the hours passed. When he finally called in January, he said, "Things were crazy. I figured you'd understand." And I said, "Of course, sweetheart." Because what else could I say? I let so many things go in the name of love. In the name of keeping peace. In the name of motherhood. But I've learned, painfully slowly, that love shouldn't cost you your voice. And peace built on silence isn't peace at all. When I look back now, I see a pattern I never questioned. How often I chose his comfort over my truth. How I wore forgiveness like armor, even when it weighed me down. And now, standing at the edge of this final chapter, I see it clearly. This isn't just about him moving me to the basement, or the paper plate, or the cold dinners and locked doors. It's about all the small betrayals that came before. The unspoken expectation that I would always bend, always yield, always give up my seat at the table. And how I, without meaning to, taught him that it was okay. But not anymore. This isn't bitterness. It's not vengeance. It's simply recognition. That I am no longer willing to pay the price for other people's comfort. That I am allowed to want air, light, respect. That I am still a whole person, even if the world around me forgets. Sometimes the deepest scars are the ones we carry in silence. The ones we smile over, excuse, explain away. But they don't vanish. They shape us. And now, I choose to shape myself, not out of pain, but out of purpose. Not to erase the past, but to honor it, and finally to heal. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I found it. They were out, visiting her sister, I think. I hadn't asked. By then, we had stopped announcing things to one another. I was dusting the shelves in the hallway, the ones where they had started placing little things that weren't mine. Decorative books with no titles, framed quotes in gold foil that said things like "Manifest your dream life." I moved one of them slightly, just enough to reach behind for the family Bible I had placed there years ago. And that's when I saw it. A manila envelope, half sticking out from behind a stack of unopened mail. Addressed to him. From the bank. At first, I didn't plan to open it. But something in my chest, something quiet but certain, told me this one wasn't junk. This one was different. I pulled it out, hands trembling. It wasn't sealed. Just loosely tucked. Inside was a letter from the mortgage office. Final steps for refinancing. Appraisal papers. Financial disclosures. And one line in bold at the bottom of the first page. Pending final transfer of home ownership to applicant's name. I stood there, the hallway suddenly colder. The kind of cold that seeps under your skin and settles deep in your bones. He was planning to take the house. Not just live in it. Not just rearrange it. He was planning to own it, legally, fully. Without even telling me. My name. Nowhere in those documents. Not as co-signer. Not as co-owner. Not even as a witness. Just gone. I read the papers over and over, as if my eyes might have lied to me. But they hadn't. He had filled in the blanks. Signed the forms. Had the meetings. Behind my back. Under my roof. with no intention of asking, just assuming. I sat down on the stairs and stared at the wall across from me. The wall I once painted yellow because I thought it would brighten the space. He painted it gray last year. Said it was more modern. It all clicked then, the sudden interest in home projects, the new office, the thermostat controls, the pantry locks. He wasn't just living here. He was erasing me. Slowly. Efficiently. Painlessly for him. He wasn't waiting for me to pass on. He was pushing me out one quiet, calculated step at a time. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, counting the water drips from the pipe above me. I thought about my husband, how he worked 2 jobs to help us buy this place, how we celebrated in this living room with root beer floats and old music. I thought about all the birthday cakes I had baked in this kitchen, all the scraped knees I had cleaned in this hallway, all the goodbyes I had whispered at the front door, and the hellos I had prayed for on sleepless nights. This house was never just walls. It was years. It was sacrifice. It was love poured in small, invisible ways, until it filled every room. And now he wanted it on paper. As if paper could carry the weight of what it meant. As if my memories could be erased by a notary stamp. I remembered once, he must have been 10 or 11. I had told him that when you take care of something, it remembers. The floors creak in certain places, I said, because they know who walks them. The doorknobs stay warm a little longer when touched by familiar hands. He laughed back then, said that wasn't real. But it was to me. And that night I knew. Even if he got the deed, even if he claimed the title, this house would never truly be his. Not in the way it had been mine. Still, the betrayal. It hurt more than I knew I could hurt. Not because of the house. Not even because of the secrets. But because it confirmed what I had tried so long not to believe. He didn't see me as part of the future. Only the past. A fading photograph he no longer had room for. He didn't just forget to ask. He didn't want to ask. Because deep down he knew the answer. And he didn't care. That's when I decided, fully, finally. This wasn't just about leaving. It was about reclaiming. I would not be signed away. I would not be erased. And I would not be quiet anymore, not in my spirit, not in my resolve. He could draw up papers. He could plan and plot. But he had forgotten the most important fact. The name on the original deed? It was mine. After that day, the day I found the refinancing papers, I stopped trying. Not out of anger. Not out of fear. But because I no longer needed to be understood. Something inside me turned, like the final click of a lock finding its fit. I no longer spoke unless I needed to. No pleasantries over breakfast. No questions about their plans. No comments about the weather. I became invisible, this time by choice. He asked once if I was feeling all right. I nodded and returned to folding the towels. She looked at me one evening, tilted her head, and asked, "Everything okay, Clara?" I just smiled. Let them wonder. I cleared out the basement slowly. Not with panic, with precision. Each day, I'd remove a few things and take them to the little storage unit I'd rented down the street. Just one box, one bag at a time. Old photo albums. A small lamp that reminded me of our first apartment. The wool coat I bought in 1994. Things with soul, not price. I kept a list in a notebook tucked in the side of my purse. Nothing dramatic. Just dates times items. And a quiet tally of my freedom. I started taking walks every afternoon. I didn't say where I was going. Didn't ask if anyone needed anything. I just put on my walking shoes, zipped my cardigan, and left. I walked past the library. Past the church where I used to sing in the choir. Sometimes, I'd stop and sit on the bench by the war memorial, just to feel the wind on my face. No one ever asked where I went. No one noticed when I started returning later and later. By the time I came home, dinner was already over. The sink was full. The lights dimmed. And I didn't mind. I ate crackers in my room with a slice of cheese and a cup of warm milk. It was enough. I didn't watch TV anymore. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to sit on a couch that no longer welcomed me. Instead, I listened to old music in my headphones. The kind we used to dance to in the kitchen when my husband was still here. He used to hum while he cooked. That's what I remembered most. One afternoon, while they were out shopping, I stood in the middle of the living room and looked around. The walls were bare of anything that belonged to me. No family portraits. No baby shoes in shadow boxes. Just abstract art and pale gray furniture. I opened the hallway closet and saw my coat, pushed to the far end, behind their things. That's when I knew. I had already left. My body just hadn't caught up yet. Later that evening, I took the porcelain angel from the top shelf of my bedroom and wrapped it in a scarf. It was a gift from my sister, the one who passed 2 winters ago. She had whispered, "This is for when you forget who you are." I placed it gently in my suitcase. It would not be left behind. The closing date on the house was approaching. Darcy kept me informed, step by step. Everything was proceeding. Clean. Quiet. Legal. I had found a small apartment in the building near the Rose Garden. 2nd floor. 1 bedroom. A tiny balcony that caught the morning light. They allowed plants on the railing. That sealed it for me. When the time came to sign the final papers, I didn't dress up. Just wore what felt like me. Soft shoes. A lavender blouse. The necklace my husband gave me on our 25th anniversary. A tiny heart with a tiny ruby. Darcy brought tea to the signing. We sat across from each other at her office table. She slid the papers to me gently, as if placing something sacred. "Whenever you're ready," she said. I read them. Every line. Slowly. With care. When I reached the signature line, I paused. Not from doubt, from reverence. Then I signed. Clara May Whitaker. My name. Still mine. I didn't feel triumphant. Didn't feel victorious. Just steady. The house was no longer mine. On paper, yes. But in truth, I had already let go of it long ago. What I took with me wasn't the walls or the floors or even the porch swing. It was the part of myself that had lived too long in shadow. That night, I didn't go home. I went to the apartment. The keys were warm in my hand. The door creaked slightly, not from age, but from welcome. I stepped inside and placed my bag on the floor. The air was clean. Quiet. New. I made myself tea and sat by the window, watching the last light stretch across the sky. No noise. No tension. Just the soft rhythm of my own breath. I didn't tell them I was leaving. Didn't leave a note. Didn't know them that. Because leaving wasn't about punishing them. It was about returning to myself, the self I had placed on a shelf for far too long. And in the silence of that small room, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Home. The first morning in the new apartment, I woke to the sound of birdsong. Not traffic. Not footsteps above my head. Not the clang of dishes I wasn't invited to eat from. Just birds, soft and simple. The light poured in through lace curtains I had chosen myself, and the walls were still bare, but they didn't feel empty. They felt open, like pages waiting for ink. I boiled water for tea on the little stove. The kettle was mine, an old one I found tucked away in a thrift store months before I left. Ceramic, chipped but familiar. When the tea was ready, I poured it into my favorite cup, a blue ceramic one that had somehow survived decades of moves and drops and dinner guests. And then I sat. No one rushed me. No one questioned me. I didn't need to hide in a basement or eat in a laundry room. This small table, this small window, this small life, it was all mine. Later that day, I opened a drawer and found the envelope again. The letter from my husband. It had grown soft at the corners, read and reread so many times the fold marks had begun to fade. I held it gently and read it again, just as I had that first time in the basement, when I had felt forgotten, discarded, useless. His words had felt like breath then. Don't let them erase you. But now, in this quiet space, they felt like truth. He had written the letter not long before he died. He had sensed something in our son that I didn't want to admit. Not cruelty, but entitlement. Not malice, but carelessness. You give, Clara. You always have. That's your beauty, but also your danger. Be careful not to give yourself away entirely. He had known me better than I had known myself. I had thought love was measured by how much you gave, how much you endured, how tightly you held everything together. But he had seen the cracks before I had. And he had written this letter as a lifeline. And now here I was. Not broken. Not bitter. Just beginning again. I placed the letter in a small frame and set it on the windowsill. Let it catch the morning light. That would be my altar now. Not a place for prayer, but for remembering who I truly was. Later that week, I visited the senior center. Not to join anything. Just to look. A woman at the front desk offered me a calendar of events, watercolor classes, tai chi, poetry readings. I took it politely and folded it into my purse. I wasn't ready to fill my days yet, but the idea that I could, that was enough for now. On the way home, I passed a little flower shop with planters out front. Pale pink petunias, tiny violets, and tucked in the corner, a tray of marigolds. Stubborn, gold-faced marigolds. The same kind I had planted in the yard for years. I bought 2. The woman at the counter asked if I had a garden. I said, "Not yet, but I have a balcony." That night, I planted them in 2 old ceramic mugs. Watched the soil settle around the roots. Placed them on the railing. Let them know they were home. The days moved slowly, but with intention. Each morning I made tea. Each evening, I wrote in a little notebook I kept by the bed. Not long entries, just fragments. I heard laughter from a neighbor's window. It didn't hurt. I hung my cardigan on a chair, and it looked like a hug. I don't miss the silence of that house. I miss who I used to be in it, but only sometimes. I allowed grief when it came. I didn't chase it away, but I didn't feed it either. And in its place, something else began to grow. Not joy, not yet, but peace. The kind that feels like exhaling for the first time in a long time. I didn't hear from him. No phone calls. No emails. Not even a message asking where I'd gone. But I had stopped needing his voice to echo mine. He was part of my story, but no longer the author. The only message I received was from Darcy, a few weeks later. She sent a photo of the sold sign posted outside the house. Beneath it, a couple stood arm in arm, smiling. They looked older. Content. Ready. I stared at the photo for a long while. Not in sadness. In release. That house had a new life now. And so did I. I looked around my tiny kitchen. At the marigolds blooming. At the letter framed by the window. And I whispered, "I remember who I am. Have you ever found strength in moments of silence? Let me know." The first sign came 2 weeks after the sale closed. I was returning from the little grocery store down the street, carrying a cloth bag with milk, bread, and a small jar of strawberry preserves, when I saw him. He was standing across the street from my apartment building, leaning on a rental car, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning windows. He didn't see me at first. I stood behind the old oak tree by the sidewalk and watched him quietly. There was no panic in me, no fear, just stillness. Eventually, he crossed the street and disappeared around the corner. I didn't call out, didn't step forward. Let him look. That same evening, the phone rang. An unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. He left no message. The next day, he called again. This time, I picked up. There was silence for a moment, and then his voice, low and unfamiliar in its softness. "Mom." I said nothing. I waited. I came home and the house. He paused. "You sold it. You didn't even tell me." I could hear the confusion in his breath. But not pain. Not at first. Just disbelief. As if the world had shifted under him for the first time. I answered calmly, "Yes, I sold it." More silence. "I didn't think you'd actually." He stopped again. "I didn't think you could." That word again. Didn't think I could. Not that I would. Not that I might. But that I couldn't. He never imagined I had the strength. Or the right. I said, "My name was on the deed. You knew that." He didn't respond right away. Then he said, "We were going to refinance." I had plans. I needed. I stopped him gently. "No, son. You made plans. Without me." There was a long breath on the other end. "Where are you?" he asked. I said, "I'm safe. I'm well. That's all you need to know right now." And then, after a pause, "You didn't see me, even when I was in the same room with you every day. Why would you start looking now?" The line went quiet. And then, he whispered, "I didn't mean to make you feel that way. But feelings aren't undone by late words." I told him, "I believe that. But meaning and impact are different things. And now we both live with what we chose." He asked if we could talk again. I said, "Maybe. One day. When you're ready to listen, not explain." And I hung up. Not with anger. Not with relief. Just finality. The next week, Darcy called to let me know they had finally vacated the house. "They left it neat," she said. "No damages. But very quiet. I imagined the silence in those rooms. Rooms that once held holiday music and baby giggles and the creak of my husband's favorite chair. Rooms that had gone cold the moment love turned into assumption. They would never know how to fill that space again. Not like I did. Not like I could. Later that month, a letter came in the mail. From him. It wasn't long. Just a few lines, written in handwriting I hadn't seen since he was in college. He said he was sorry. Said he didn't realize how far things had gone. Said he had taken for granted the life I had built, and the grace I had shown him in it. He didn't ask to come back. Didn't plead. Just acknowledged. And for that I was grateful. Because I didn't need him to apologize for selling the furniture or ignoring my birthday, or changing the locks on the thermostat. I needed him to see the pattern, to name it, and he had, even if only in a few short words. I didn't write back. Not because I was punishing him, but because I had no more to give to that chapter. I had already lived it, survived it, closed it one box, one breath, one choice at a time. And now I was living something new. I hung a small wind chime on my balcony. It was shaped like a hummingbird, and it made the softest sound when the wind passed through. Some evenings, I sat outside and listened to it sing, while the marigolds nodded in the breeze. I watched neighbors come and go, couples walking hand in hand, children chasing scooters. No one knew my story here. No one looked at me with pity or expectation. They just smiled as they passed. And I smiled back. Sometimes I still heard his voice in my mind. The little boy who used to say, "Watch me, Mama." The teenager who slammed doors. The man who forgot how to see me. But the woman he forgot? She remembered herself. And she no longer needed anyone else's permission to matter. It was mid-March when he came to find me. The frost had just begun to lift from the mornings, and the sidewalks no longer shimmered with ice. Spring was waking up, slowly, carefully, just like I had. He didn't call first. Just showed up. I saw him from the window, standing at the edge of the apartment garden, hands stuffed into his jacket pockets, looking smaller than I remembered. He didn't bring flowers. Or a gift. Just himself, and whatever words he had finally gathered. I let him knock twice before opening the door. He looked at me like someone searching for the right face in an old photograph. "Hi, Mom," he said. I stepped aside without a word, motioning for him to come in. He glanced around at the modest furniture, the framed letter on the windowsill, the marigolds still holding their color in their little mugs. "This place is nice," he said, a little uncertain. I nodded and sat at the kitchen table. He followed, hesitating before pulling out the chair across from me. He folded his hands, then unfolded them. Cleared his throat. "I didn't come to fight," he said. "I just wanted to talk. If that's okay." I waited. He stared down at the table as he spoke. "I didn't realize how far things had gone. How much I hurt you." His voice cracked then. "Not for drama. Just truth. I thought I was helping. That I was organizing things. I didn't think I was." He stopped himself. Then said it. "I didn't think I was pushing you out." I looked at him. Not with judgment, not even with disappointment. Just clarity. "You didn't think at all," I said softly. And that was the truth. He looked up. I could see the wetness in his eyes, the red-rimmed edges of someone who had finally sat with himself long enough to feel shame. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I nodded slowly. "I believe you," I said. "I always wanted to." We sat in silence for a while. The kind of silence that isn't cold, just full. Then he asked, "Why didn't you say anything sooner? Why didn't you just tell me how bad it felt?" I took a breath. Because I did. In small ways. With quiet looks. With long silences. With the way I stepped aside over and over. But you didn't see it. Or you didn't want to. He swallowed hard. "I thought you'd always be there," he said. "I was," I answered. "Until I wasn't." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a photo, a copy of one I used to keep in the hallway. The three of us on the porch swing. He was 8, grinning barefoot. My husband's arm around my shoulder. He placed it gently on the table. "I keep this in my wallet now," he said. "I look at it every day." I touched the edge of the photo, then pushed it back toward him. "I'm not that woman anymore," I said. "And you're not that boy." He nodded. "I know." Then, a question I wasn't expecting. "Is there any way back?" I looked at him for a long moment. "There's no going back," I said. "There's only going forward. But we'd have to walk that road differently this time." He waited. "I don't need apologies anymore," I continued. "I need boundaries. I need honesty. And I need to be treated like someone who matters, not just when I'm missing, but while I'm still here." He nodded again. "I don't know if I can fix everything," he said. I smiled gently. "You can't, but you can stop breaking it further." He sat with that, then asked, "Can I visit you sometimes?" I nodded. "If you come as a son who listens, not a man who manages." He let out a soft breath. Almost a laugh. But not one of humor, more of relief. "I'd like that," he said. We didn't hug. Not then. It wasn't time yet. But as I walked him to the door, I paused and added one last thing. "I want you to understand something," I said. "I didn't leave the house to hurt you. I left because I had to save myself." He looked at me then, really looked, and said, "I think I finally understand that now." I opened the door. The sun had begun to set, casting a warm gold across the floor. He stepped outside and turned back once, hand resting on the frame. "I'll call you," he said. I nodded, and then I closed the door, gently, completely. Not in anger, not in finality, but in strength. And when I turned back toward my home, it felt even more mine than it had before. Because I hadn't waited to be rescued. I had rescued myself. The days became mine again. Not because they were filled with grand things, not trips or celebrations or applause, but because they were simple, whole. I started keeping a tin of sugar cookies on the counter, just like I used to. The same kind I baked when my son was little, when he'd run through the kitchen and sneak one before dinner. Now, I ate them slowly, one each afternoon with tea, watching the light move across the floorboards. I planted more flowers. Marigolds, of course, but also lavender, a few snapdragons, even some ivy, winding its way up the balcony railing like it had somewhere to be. My apartment stayed quiet most of the time, but not in the aching way the house had been. This quiet was restful, comfortable. It didn't ask me to shrink. It let me breathe. I started going to the senior center once a week. At first just to sit in the back during poetry readings. But eventually, I began bringing a notebook and writing down little things, moments, thoughts, memories that felt like warm stones in my pocket. They weren't for anyone else. Just for me. One afternoon, a woman named Marjorie asked if I wanted to join the gardening club. I said yes. We planted window boxes for the center, herbs and wildflowers mostly. Nothing fancy. But every time I pushed my hands into the soil, I felt something quiet inside me steady again. My son called once a week now. Always in the evening. Never to ask for anything. Sometimes he'd just tell me about a book he was reading. Or something funny that happened at work. He never asked to come visit right away. He knew better than to rush that. But the calls were enough. For now. He was learning. Slowly. The way people do when they've finally been made to look at themselves fully. I didn't forgive everything. But I did begin to soften toward the possibility of trust again. Because now I had boundaries. And more than that, I had peace. One Sunday, I walked to the little bookstore near the corner and bought a frame. Not for an old photo. Not for a certificate. But for a piece of paper I wrote myself. On it I wrote, "I am not invisible. I am not a burden. I am not something to be managed." And I hung it on the wall above my reading chair. It made me smile every time I saw it. Sometimes I still thought of the house. The creak in the floor by the stairs. The hum of the refrigerator late at night. The porch swing where I once sat with a slice of peach pie and a storybook in my lap. But I didn't miss it. Not in the way I feared I would. Because I realized something. What made that place special had always lived inside me. I carried it with me now. In the way I folded my sweaters, in the songs I hummed while I watered the plants, in the way I warmed my tea kettle every morning. I had built a life before. And I had built it again. Only this time I built it for myself. Not out of sacrifice. Not out of obligation. But out of love, quiet, steady love. For the girl I once was. For the woman I had become. For the peace I now protected like a flame. There was no parade. No dramatic ending. Just morning light. A soft wind through the window. And a woman who remembered her name. Sometimes I sit on my little balcony, just as the sun begins to set, when the light turns gold and the world feels hushed, like it's holding its breath. I sip my tea and watch the marigolds bow gently in the breeze. And I think about the journey I walked, not the kind with suitcases or signs, but the kind that takes place inside you. The kind where you lose pieces of yourself quietly, until one day, you wake up and realize you're no longer in the room where your heart lives. I spent so long trying to belong, trying to be useful, to be pleasant, to be small enough to fit into someone else's idea of where I should stand. But I've learned something now. You don't have to earn space in a place you built with your own hands. And you don't have to stay where love has become a transaction. Sometimes, reclaiming your life doesn't look like running. It looks like walking, one small step at a time. Out of the basement, out of the silence, out of the story they wrote for you, and into your own. If you've ever felt like you disappeared while standing right in the center of your own home, I want you to hear this. You are not invisible. You are not a burden. You do not need their permission to matter. And the moment you decide to come back to yourself, even quietly, is the moment the world begins to shift in your favor. So go gently, go bravely, and go as yourself. If you've ever felt forgotten or unseen, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments. I'm listening.